What if I told you there's a country so beautiful, so untouched, yet so overlooked that most people don't even know it exists? A place where paradise meets poverty, where history is still fresh, and where the future is still being written. This is Timor-Leste, Asia's youngest nation, and one of the most misunderstood places on Earth. The truth about Asia's youngest nation. Hidden between the sprawling volcanic peaks of Indonesia and the vast, sun-bleached horizons of Australia lies Timor-Leste, a country that only stepped onto the world stage as a sovereign state in 2002. This distinction makes it one of the newest nations in the modern world, a political infant in a neighborhood of giants. However, to look at its date of birth and assume a lack of depth is a mistake. Don't let its young age fool you. This land has lived through centuries of struggle, its soil soaked in the complicated legacy of empires and the relentless pursuit of self-determination. The story of Timor-Leste is one of breathtaking endurance. It was first colonized by Portugal in the 16th century, becoming a distant, aromatic outpost of sandalwood and coffee that remained under Lusophone influence for over 400 years. When that colonial tie finally snapped in 1975, the taste of freedom lasted only days before the country was occupied by Indonesia. What followed was a quarter-century of profound hardship, a period where Timor-Leste endured years of conflict, isolation, and loss. Yet, the spirit of the people remained unyielding, surviving the mountain guerrillas' resistance and the quiet defiance of the villages until they finally stood free under their own flag. Even today, that turbulent past still echoes in everyday life. It is visible in the architecture of the capital, Dili, where Portuguese ruins sit alongside modern Indonesian-style markets, and it is audible in the local Tetum language, peppered with the linguistic ghosts of its former rulers. The scars of the 20th century haven't disappeared. They have simply been woven into the fabric of a new identity. The people carry the gravity of their history with a quiet dignity, knowing that while the fighting has stopped, the real work has only just begun. A hidden paradise no one is visiting. When people think of tropical paradise, they think of the manicured luxury of Bali, the neon-lit shores of Thailand, or the overwater bungalows of the Maldives. These places have been mapped, tagged, and filtered until every palm tree feels familiar. But almost no one mentions Timor-Leste, and that's exactly why it feels untouched. It is a destination that hasn't been polished for the masses or eroded by the heavy footsteps of mass tourism. Instead of a curated experience, it offers a raw, unfiltered encounter with the edge of the world. The beaches here are quiet, stretching for miles without a single plastic chair or a persistent vendor in sight. The water is crystal clear, shimmering in shades of cobalt and turquoise that feel too vivid to be real, while the air feels different, thick with the scent of salt and wild eucalyptus, unburdened by the smog of heavy industry. In the capital, Dili, life moves slowly, dictated by the rising sun and the cooling evening breeze rather than the frantic ticking of a corporate clock. There is no rush, no pressure, and no overwhelming crowds. It is a city that breathes, where the simple act of drinking a coffee by the waterfront feels like a meditation. It's just people living day by day, grounded in a rhythm that the rest of the world has long since forgotten. But the true magic lies just across the Wetar Strait. There sits Toro Island, a rugged silhouette on the horizon that guards one of the most biodiverse marine ecosystems in the world. While the rest of the planet's reefs are struggling, the waters around Toro are exploding with life. Divers who have explored every corner of the globe say the underwater life here is richer than anywhere else they've seen. A single dive can reveal a dizzying kaleidoscope of coral gardens, reef sharks, and schools of fish so dense they blot out the sun. It is a place of superlatives that doesn't feel the need to boast. Real life is harder than it looks. But once you step away from the shimmering coastline and the quiet comfort of the capital, the postcard image begins to fade, and you start to see the reality of a nation in its infancy. Beyond the turquoise water lies a rugged, interior landscape where the geography is as demanding as the history. Here, The struggle for independence has been replaced by the struggle for modernization. Timor-Leste is still developing, grappling with the immense logistical hurdles of a country where the mountains are steep and the infrastructure is fragile. In these highlands and remote valleys, the luxuries of the modern world are far from a given. Many people live without stable electricity, seeing the sun as their only reliable clock. Clean water is not always guaranteed, often requiring a communal effort to secure and transport. In these communities, jobs are limited, and the concept of a career is often sidelined by the immediate demands of the land. In rural areas, survival depends on the ancient, grueling rhythms of farming, fishing, and hard physical work. Life is dictated by the success of the maize harvest or the catch of the day, leaving little room for error. As you travel deeper into the heart of the country, you will see children walking long distances along dusty roads just to reach a classroom, their uniforms kept impeccably white against the red earth. You will see families living simply in traditional homes, where wealth is measured in community and kinship rather than currency. You will see a country still trying to stand on its own feet, navigating the transition from a resistance economy to a global one. But what you will also see, hidden in the steady gaze of the elders and the tireless energy of the youth, is something even more powerful than the obstacles they face. Resilience. It is a quiet, indestructible strength, a refusal to be defined by poverty or the weight of the past. A culture shaped by history and faith. Timor-Leste is deeply cultural, deeply spiritual, and profoundly connected to its roots in a way that feels visceral to anyone who walks its soil. This is not a culture preserved in museums or performed for tourists. It is a living, breathing identity that serves as the nation's backbone. The official languages are Tetum and Portuguese, a linguistic duality that reflects a long colonial past. But the true communication of the country happens in the shared silence of prayer and the vibrant energy of communal ritual. Culture here goes far beyond language. It is the very fabric of how people relate to the land, the sea, and one another. In this corner of the world, religion plays a central role that is both public and intensely personal. The country is one of the most Catholic in Asia, a faith that became a symbol of national identity and a sanctuary of hope during the decades of Indonesian occupation. Because of this shared history, churches are not just places of worship. They are the heart of the community, serving as town squares, shelters, and symbols of the people's endurance. On Sundays, the air is filled with choral music that drifts through open windows, signaling that faith is not a weekend obligation, but a fundamental part of everyday life. However, the spiritual landscape of Timor-Leste is beautifully complex. In the mountain villages and coastal hamlets, traditional animist beliefs still exist alongside modern religion in a seamless blend of the sacred. High on the hillsides, you will find Lulik, sacred houses built on stilts with high, thatched roofs, which serve as the dwellings for ancestral spirits. These rituals and ancestral connections dictate everything from marriage to the harvest, ensuring that the wisdom of the dead continues to guide the hands of the living. This is a country where the past is not forgotten or relegated to the history books. The calm life of Dili at night. At night, Dili does not explode with energy like other Asian capitals. There is no neon-drenched chaos, no frantic pulse of traffic, and no sensory overload. Instead, as the tropical sun dips below the horizon and the heat finally breaks, the city slows down even more. The transition into evening is not a change in tempo, but a deepening of the stillness. It is a time when the capital feels less like a political hub and more like a collection of front porches, where the boundaries between public and private life begin to soften under the warm glow of street lamps. Rather than gravitating toward massive commercial centers, people gather in small, intimate groups along the waterfront or in the shadows of the banyan trees. Street food stalls open quietly, the scent of grilled fish and satay drifting through the humid air as vendors set up modest plastic chairs on the pavement. Music plays softly in the background, often the soulful, melodic strains of a guitar or a local ballad, competing only with the rhythmic sound of the tide hitting the seawall. There are no massive clubs shaking the earth with bass, and no overwhelming nightlife designed to distract or entertain. The city rejects the performative noise of modern tourism in favor of something much more rare and authentic. In this space, the evening is filled with just conversations, shared meals, and the low hum of community. You hear the cadence of Tatum mixed with light-hearted laughter, the sound of neighbors checking in on one another, and the simple beauty of human connection that hasn't been mediated by a screen. There's a profound sense of safety in this quietude, a feeling that everyone belongs to the same story. It is a reminder that you don't need spectacle to find meaning. Sometimes, the quietest places feel the most alive because they allow the heartbeat of the people to finally be heard. Food that tells a deeper story. Food in Timor-Leste is not about luxury or the pursuit of culinary trends. It is a fundamental act of survival and a testament to the land's seasonal rhythms. There are no sprawling gourmet markets or fine dining districts defining the landscape. Instead, meals are simple, honest, and dictated by the geography of the island. A typical plate is a humble assembly of rice, local vegetables, and perhaps a piece of fish or meat, depending on the fortune of the day. There is no pretense here. Everything depends on what is available, what the earth has yielded, and what the sea has surrendered. Near the coast, life is inextricably tied to the tides, and seafood is common, often grilled over open flames with nothing more than a squeeze of lime and a dash of sea salt. But as you move into the rugged interior, the diet shifts to the sturdiness of the earth. In the mountain villages, people eat what they grow with their own hands, relying on the caloric hardiness of cassava, corn, and dark, leafy greens. The struggles no one shows you. Timor-Leste is undeniably beautiful, a rugged sanctuary of cobalt waters and emerald peaks, but is also profoundly fragile. The nation exists in a delicate state of transition, where the euphoria of hard-won independence meets the sobering gravity of modern statehood. This fragility isn't just environmental, it is economic and social. Unemployment is high, leaving a large portion of the population, particularly the youth, in a state of restless limbo. In a country where over half the people are under the age of 20, many young people struggle to find opportunities that match their ambitions, leading to a palpable sense of untapped potential that could either be the nation's greatest engine or its most significant source of instability. The weight of this future rests on a precarious foundation. The economy depends heavily on oil revenues. For years, the petroleum fund has been the lifeblood of the country, financing everything from civil service salaries to the paving of new roads. But this creates a haunting uncertainty that hangs over every budget meeting and developmental plan. Because resources don't last forever, and the global shift toward renewable energy means the clock is ticking on the very commodity that keeps the lights on. The challenge is not just to spend this wealth, but to diversify away from it before the wells run dry. This economic pressure trickles down into the very bones of the country. Infrastructure is still growing, with many remote communities remaining isolated by unpaved mountain passes that wash away during the monsoon season. Similarly, the healthcare and education systems are still developing, often operating with limited supplies, a shortage of trained specialists, and a legacy of destroyed facilities that they are still racing to replace. These are not small challenges or minor setbacks in an otherwise smooth trajectory. They are defining challenges, the crucible in which the next generation of Timorese identity will be forged, the strength of its people. And yet, despite the weight of these systemic hurdles and the crushing uncertainty of the future, the people of Timor-Leste remain remarkably strong. Their spirits are not brittle. They are forged in a fire that most of the world can only imagine. They have faced the slow erasure of colonization, the terrifying chaos of war, and the suffocating decades of occupation. They have seen their villages burned and their families scattered, only to return to the ashes and begin the exhausting, manual labor of rebuilding from nothing. Through it all, they have not merely endured, they have prevailed, and they are still standing. In the face of a history that should have left them bitter or broken, you find a population that is still smiling and still hoping. This isn't a naive optimism or a lack of awareness. It is a conscious daily choice to look forward. There's a quiet dignity here, a presence that commands respect without ever having to demand it. It is the dignity of a person who knows exactly who they are because they had to fight for the right to exist. This is a strength that does not need to be loud. It doesn't require grand displays of power or aggressive rhetoric to prove its worth. In Timor-Leste, resilience is found in the steady hands of a farmer, the focused eyes of a student, and the welcoming nod of a stranger on a dusty road. It is a silent, immovable force because it has already survived too much to be shaken by the small storms of the present. They have walked through the darkest chapters of the human experience and emerged into the light, holding onto their humanity with a grip that nothing can break. Why this country feels so different. There is something about Timor-Leste that feels fundamentally different from any other place on the map. In an era where global travel has become a streamlined industry of curated moments, this country remains a defiant outlier. It is not polished to a high-gloss finish, nor is it a commercial playground designed to cater to every whim. It is not built for tourists, and because of that, it possesses a rarity that is becoming harder to find with every passing year. It is real. There is no curtain to peek behind, and no sanitized version of reality presented for the sake of a positive review. What you see when you travel through its rugged interior or sit along the Dili waterfront is what life actually looks like for the people who call this half-island home. There is no artifice in the way the day unfolds. Nature is raw, unfenced, unpaved, and unapologetically wild. The mountains don't have handrails, and the beaches don't have lifeguards. They exist in their ancient, powerful state, indifferent to the gaze of the traveler. It is a landscape that demands respect and offers, in return, a sense of wonder that feels earned rather than bought. People are genuine in a way that can be startling to those used to the transactional smiles of more developed hubs. A conversation with a local isn't a pitch for a tour or a request for a tip. It is a simple, human exchange between two people standing on the same patch of earth. Experiences here are not manufactured in a boardroom or scripted by a marketing agency. They are the result of spontaneous encounters, a shared ride in a crowded microlet, an invitation to sit under a mango tree, or the sight of a traditional ceremony unfolding in a mountain mist. In a world increasingly full of artificial experiences and Instagrammable facades, Timor-Leste feels profoundly honest. It offers the truth of a nation still finding its way, the truth of a nature still untouched by greed, and the truth of a people who have nothing to hide, a future still being written. Timor-Leste is still at the beginning, standing in the fragile, golden hour of its own dawn. Unlike nations whose stories were codified centuries ago, this country is a work in progress, a rough draft of a democracy that is being revised in real time. It possesses an undeniable, untapped potential and a raw, cinematic beauty that could one day make it the envy of the region. Most importantly, it has strong people, a population whose grit has been tested in the crucible of resistance and who now carry the heavy mantle of architects. But as the initial euphoria of independence settles into the long, hard work of governance, the nation finds itself facing big questions that cannot be answered with slogans or flags. The most pressing of these is the future of the next generation. Can it create jobs for its youth? With a demographic youth bulge that is both a blessing and a ticking clock, the government must find a way to transform energy into industry, ensuring that its brightest minds don't feel forced to seek a future on distant shores. Alongside this economic challenge lies a cultural one. Can it grow without losing its identity? As the world inevitably begins to knock louder at its door, Timor-Leste must decide how to welcome progress and technology without eroding the sacred liaison traditions and the communal bonds that kept the people whole during the dark years of occupation. Can it turn decades of struggle into a permanent, institutional strength? Transitioning from a resistance movement to a functioning state requires a radical shift in mindset, from surviving the day to planning for the decade. It requires building systems of healthcare, education, and law that are as resilient as the people they serve. No one knows the answers yet. There are no blueprints for a nation born under these specific conditions, and there is no guarantee of an easy path forward. But that uncertainty is precisely what makes the country so compelling. So now I want to ask you, if you had the chance to live in a peaceful country like this, simple life, beautiful nature, but real challenges, would you take it? Or would you choose comfort somewhere else? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to discover more countries the world ignores, make sure you subscribe, because the next story might surprise you even more.